My name is James Crawford. I'm 95 years old. And what I'm about to tell you is something most people won't say out loud because they're terrified of how it sounds. They don't want to be called ungrateful or heartless. But I've lived long enough to stop caring about how things sound and start caring about what things actually are. I've spent nearly a century on this earth. I've buried people I loved. I've watched children become adults. I've seen marriages begin and end. I've held hands in hospital rooms and sat alone in empty kitchens at 3 a.m, wondering where everything went wrong. Through all of it, I kept learning. Slowly, painfully, and almost always too late. These are 7 lessons that took my entire life to understand. They're brutally simple. But simple truths are the hardest to accept, especially when they involve the people who share your last name. The people you grew up believing would always have your back because you came from the same blood. I was wrong about that. And that single wrong belief cost me decades of time, money, peace, and pieces of my heart I'll never get back. I grew up in a house where family was sacred. You didn't question family. You didn't criticize family. You didn't walk away from family no matter what they did. Blood was thicker than everything. My mother used to say, "James, at the end of the day, family is all you've got." She meant it with love. And I carried that belief like armor for decades. My older brother Harold borrowed money from me for the first time when I was 29. Rent money. His wife had left, he was between jobs, and he sounded desperate. I wrote him a check the next morning. No questions, no repayment plan. He was my brother. That was enough. 6 months later, he borrowed again, then again the following year, then twice the year after that. Over 15 years, Harold borrowed more times than I can count. I stopped keeping track because counting felt like betraying the family bond I was taught to protect. He never paid back a single dollar. And every time I carefully brought it up, he'd say, "James, I'm your brother. You're really going to put money between us?" That one sentence kept me quiet for 15 years. It turned my reasonable expectation into something shameful, as if wanting fairness from family made me the problem. Harold didn't borrow because he was desperate. He borrowed because he knew I wouldn't say no. He'd learned that my loyalty had no limit, no floor, no bottom. Sharing a last name with someone doesn't guarantee they'll treat you with respect or basic decency. Some of the deepest wounds I've ever received came from people who sat across from me at the dinner table. Family can be a fortress. Family can also be a fire. And calling it family doesn't change the temperature of the flames. I was a generous man. Generosity was how I showed love. When someone I loved needed something and I could provide it, saying no felt physically wrong. My sister Dorothy knew this better than anyone. She knew exactly which words would bypass my logic and go straight to my guilt. She knew that mentioning our mother, Mama would want us to take care of each other, would make me fold every single time. Over 20 years, Dorothy received from me what amounted to a small fortune. School fees for her children, car repairs, rent, medical bills, vacation money she said she needed for her mental health. I worked 60-hour weeks to earn that money, and it vanished into her life like water on sand. The problem wasn't the giving. The problem was that I never set a single boundary, never once said, "I can help this time, but we need a plan." Drawing a line felt like building a wall, and walls between family felt like failure. So instead of walls, I had nothing. And a life without boundaries isn't generous. It's a buffet. An all-you-can-take buffet where the person providing the food would rather starve than close the kitchen. In '78, I nearly lost my home. Catherine sat me down and showed me our finances. 3 months behind on the mortgage. Savings that wouldn't cover a week of groceries. Every dollar that should have been there was in Dorothy's life, solving Dorothy's problems. Catherine said quietly, "James, you're so busy saving your sister that you're drowning your own family." That night I understood. Generosity without boundaries isn't love. It's self-destruction on a payment plan. For most of my life, I was a quiet man. I preferred peace over confrontation. I'd rather absorb an insult than create a scene. I told myself this was maturity and restraint. It wasn't. It was permission. Every time someone disrespected me and I said nothing, I gave them permission to do it again. Every time someone crossed a line and I looked away, I moved the line further back. Every time someone treated me poorly and I stayed silent, I taught them there were no consequences. My nephew Richard was the most talented student of my silence. He learned early that Uncle James would tolerate anything. He'd show up late without apology. He'd make comments about my job, my house, my car, and I'd smile tightly and change the subject. He'd ask me for money in front of others, knowing I couldn't refuse without looking petty. Richard didn't respect me, and the uncomfortable truth was that I'd never given him a reason to. Respect isn't automatically granted because you're older or kind. It's maintained by showing that you won't accept being treated without it. Every time I stayed silent, I wasn't keeping the peace. I was keeping the pattern. Telling everyone that my dignity was negotiable, that my feelings were secondary to family harmony. Silence isn't always golden. Sometimes silence is surrender in polite clothing. There's a difference between giving someone a hand up and putting them on your back. A hand up is temporary. You help someone get on their feet and they stand on their own. That's healthy. Being carried is different. Someone climbs on your back with no intention of getting off. Your strength becomes their transportation. Your stability becomes their lifestyle. My cousin Walter was carried by the family for over 30 years. He was intelligent, capable, healthy, and perpetually in crisis. Every few months, a new emergency. Job lost, lease broken, debt spiraling. And every few months, the family would rally, pool money, fix the problem, and set him on his feet. Every single time, within weeks, he'd be right back where he started. Not because life was cruel to Walter, but because he'd learned that he didn't need to stand on his own. Every time he fell, someone caught him. The safety net was so reliable that he stopped trying to walk the tightrope entirely. I contributed to that pattern for years, told myself I was being helpful, but I was actually removing every natural consequence that might have motivated him to change. So focused on protecting him from pain that I accidentally protected him from growth. Some people genuinely need help and should receive it without hesitation. But some people don't want help. They want to be carried. And the kindest thing you can do for someone who refuses to walk is to stop carrying them. Not because you don't care, because carrying them is the very thing preventing them from discovering they have legs. This was the hardest lesson, like swallowing broken glass. You can love someone completely and still reach the point where staying in their life is destroying yours. My last conversation with Dorothy was in '91. It wasn't dramatic. No screaming. No slammed doors. It was quiet, almost gentle, and that's what made it devastating. I told her I loved her. I meant it. I told her I always would. I meant that too. Then I told her I couldn't do this anymore. The borrowing, the broken promises, the phone calls that started with small talk and ended with requests, the feeling of being valued not for who I was, but for what I could provide. She cried. I cried. Then I drove home and sat in my car in the driveway for 45 minutes before going inside. Because walking away from someone you love feels exactly like what it is, a small death. The death of a hope you've carried for years that this time things would be different. Love is never enough to change a pattern someone doesn't want to change. Walking away didn't mean I stopped loving her. It meant I finally loved myself enough to admit I deserved better than being someone's emergency fund with a heartbeat. My loyalty was the fuel in her engine. As long as I kept filling the tank, she had no reason to change. You can love someone and still walk away. Sometimes it's the most loving thing you can do, for them and for yourself. When I started setting boundaries, saying no, walking away, closing doors I'd kept open for decades, something remarkable happened. Most people disappeared, not gradually, overnight. The phone stopped ringing. Invitations stopped. People who had been fixtures in my life evaporated the moment I stopped being useful. That disappearance was painful. But it was also the most valuable information I ever received. It showed me clearly who had been there for me, and who had been there for what I could give them. The difference between love and extraction, between relationship and transaction. But not everyone left. Catherine stayed. My son Robert stayed. My neighbor Dwight stayed. A childhood friend named Gerald who called every birthday stayed. Margaret from piano lessons stayed. They didn't stay because they needed me. They stayed because they valued me. There's a universe of difference between those two things. The people who stay when you stop performing, stop providing, stop being endlessly useful, those are the real ones. Those are the people who see you as a human being rather than a resource. Everyone else was just visiting. And visitors leave when the hospitality runs out. This keeps me up at night. Not because I haven't accepted it, but because acceptance doesn't erase the weight. I'm 95. When I look back honestly, no nostalgia, no rose-colored glasses, I can see exactly how many years I lost, not to tragedy or illness or bad luck, to toxic relationships I refused to leave because leaving felt like failure. 15 years lending money to Harold, 20 years funding Dorothy, a decade absorbing Richard's disrespect, 30 years carrying Walter from crisis to crisis. That time is gone, permanently. I can't redo those decades with the wisdom I have now. Can't unwrite those checks, unswallow those insults, unsilence those moments when I should have spoken. The lesson only becomes clear after the cost is paid. You don't realize how much time you've lost until you're standing in your 90s, looking at years you gave to people who didn't earn them and wouldn't have done the same for you. I'm telling you this because you still have time. Whatever age you are, however deep you are in a draining relationship, you still have time. But only if you act. Only if you stop waiting for toxic people to change, because they won't. The garden. I think of my life as a garden now. For decades I let everything grow, weeds and flowers alike. Couldn't pull anything out because even the weeds were familiar. But a garden that's never pruned isn't a garden. It's a jungle. The weeds grow so thick the flowers can't get sunlight. The things you refuse to remove kill the things you were trying to protect. When I finally started pulling weeds, the flowers came back. Slowly, cautiously, but they came back. Catherine and I had our best years after I stopped giving everything to people who never gave back. My relationship with Robert deepened. I found real friendships and genuine peace for the first time. All because I learned the difference between plants that nourish the garden and weeds that strangle it. Final words. I'm 95. My hands shake pouring coffee. My knees haven't worked properly since the 90s. I need glasses to read anything. But my mind is clear. And what I see looking back is this. People who love you don't drain you. They don't manipulate you. They don't make you feel guilty for having boundaries. They don't disappear when you stop being useful. People who love you show up. Consistently, quietly, without agenda. When things are good and when things are terrible, and on ordinary Tuesdays when nothing is happening at all. Find those people, keep those people, build your life around those people. And everyone else, regardless of shared blood or history, gets exactly as much of you as they've earned, not more. Not because you're cold, because you've learned that your life, your peace, your time, and your heart are not unlimited resources for anyone with a familiar face and an open hand. Protect your garden, pull the weeds, let the flowers grow. That's all I've got for today.